Welcome back to the Let's Go podcast. We're here at FBC Athens. We say, love God, live like Jesus, serve others. Let's go. It's our mission statement. And so today in the Let's Go podcast, we're getting into our second week of the Abraham series. We're still in Genesis 12, kind of getting to the end of Genesis 12 into 13. But welcome back, Hunter and Juan. Yesterday we had two sermons from you guys. A lot of us got to hear Hunter's sermon. Juan, why don't you just dive right in? And kind of talk us through kind of the angle you took on this text.
Yeah, so Genesis 12, we get into more in depth of the life of Abraham, which at this time he's still Abram, and how God had given him the promise, the promised land, and to be the father of a great nation. And we find ourselves in the promised land, but there's a great famine. And that's where the issue is what happens next, right? Egypt is an option for them to go and find the help that they need. As they're moving into, because he lived there for a certain amount of time, the issue is his wife, Sarai, who is very beautiful. And because of this, Abram is looking at the situation as, if we go in and they see my wife, they're going to want to take her, and that's bad news for me. And almost this fear that overtakes him, and how that kind of prompted this like chain reaction of decisions that he ended up taking. And we ask ourselves, where's the trust, that he should have had in God, into the promises that God had already given him, but he really leans on a deception and says that he really doesn't mention that she's his wife, but says she's my sister, which is kind of a half-truth.
Right.
But we know half-truths are 100% lies, right? And then Pharaoh takes Sarai, and this great disease, comes upon Pharaoh's family, and he literally asks Abram, he says, "Why did you do this to me?" Yeah. He ends up getting all of this wealth from the Egyptians. And we can ask ourselves, and I think Hunter brought this point up, is like how is that fair? How is that fair that he got all of this, and even though he was kind of not trusting God, and I took that direction of don't let fear guide you. Don't live in a house of fear, but live in a house of love. And that I got that from Henry Nouwen, and how he was like, when you are looking at decisions, be aware that you're not guided by fear, but of love. Mm-hmm. Depend on the people around you to help you, to guide you. God has given you everything you need. Just trust in that and lean on that. So that's where I went with my sermon.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. There's going to be lots of interesting stories as we go through the rest of Abraham's life. We're real familiar with some of the high points of his life, but in some of these stories, we're getting into some strange details of ancient Near Eastern culture, and so, the beginnings of a lot of civilization. At least it's really at the beginning of the Bible, and so this is some stuff a long time ago, and it may be hard for us to read some of these stories and go, why in the world would he offer up his sister in that? So it's a really interesting story, and it is hitting on that theme of trusting in God and not fearing. And Hunter, you got into that a little bit with this idea of being half in. Why don't you talk a little more about that? And you did that in the first week as well, but you re-mentioned it this week.
I think it's a Charles Spurgeon quote, but it's one of those. So many quotes are attributed to Charles Spurgeon. I don't know that we really even know, but the quote is, "Half in is still half miserable, because you're just enough in the presence of God to be miserable in the world, and just enough in the world to be miserable in the presence of God." And so when you are half in on the Christian faith, you are always going to be a little bit uncomfortable at church in some ways, because you don't feel like, maybe I don't belong here. I'm still holding on to these things from the world, or you're out, maybe doing things in the world that you're like, oh, but I got this Christian faith that makes me uncomfortable here, and it's, and so some people would ask, like, is the question to be all in or all out? It's like, no, I think half in's better than all out, but the goal of the Christian life is to be all in on it, and you'll live a way less miserable life. And you think, if I have to give up all these things, I'll be miserable. And for yesterday's sermon in the text at the end of Genesis 12, it's Abram was half in on trusting God, and so he told a half lie because he was half in, and being half in on trusting God doesn't work. It still is, like Juan said, it's still a whole lie that he tells, and is deceptive, and his deception hurts Pharaoh. It hurts Pharaoh's family, and Juan, one of the things that I had unpacked is this. I came across this argument in Old Testament scholars kind of builds this argument that, Pharaoh would have been cursed either way because Abraham would have been killed if he didn't lie about his sister. And so I kind of built up this idea that no. The text says Abraham worked up in his mind he was going to be killed. Yeah. So he chased this straw man. And so why do we have any reason to believe, knowing what we know, now hindsight's 2020, knowing what we know, that it wouldn't have worked out like it worked out with Joseph? Like maybe he would have had a rocky road, but he could have arose to second in command in Egypt.
I mean, because to me it doesn't make sense that he was going to get killed by Pharaoh if God had already given him the promise of being the father of the Hebrew nation. It's like, whoa, that doesn't fit into that argument. So yeah.
So
right, who's to say the famine is the real thing that's drawing all of these people. We see it over and over. You mentioned yesterday, there's so many stories in the Bible of when famine hits, and let's not forget this area of the world we're talking about. When famine hits,
land dries up.
You're in the desert. There's no anything. And so why do people go to Egypt? Well, Egypt has the Nile River, and down there is just a fertile area, and so they had more things, and they stored things, as we see in the Joseph story, like storing up resources for people. So it wasn't just Abraham probably that is coming to Egypt in this time. There's probably lots of people coming in
tons
this
of
time.
people groups and tribes.
And so where does this half lie that he's telling himself come from if we assume that there's a lot of people, perhaps he's got a lot of folks with him, Lot and all of the family and all of these people. And it's not just like, hey, Juan's family's going down to Egypt. It's like bringing a little city with you to Egypt.
Yeah.
And so with him being the patron of that city, he's probably thinking, well, I'm going to get to meet with Pharaoh.
Sure.
And so Pharaoh is an important guy.
Yeah.
And he's going to look to my wife and he's going to say, I'm going to take her.
That's my wife. Yeah.
And that's fear.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was really good. Hunter did a little piece on just when someone texts you and says, hey, I want to meet. And it's like your brain just starts going.
What is this about?
So I made that joke and I was like, man, as a pastor, people always they just say, let's meet. And it's like, oh no, this is the worst thing in the world. And then they show up and they're like, I want to show you a picture of my dog, or I want to show you a picture of my grandkids, or whatever. And it's like, oh man, I've spent so much emotional energy chasing this straw man in my mind that it distracted me from the things that God has called me to do.
And so, perhaps that's what he's chasing in some degree. Hunter made this point, one of his first points was God's promises don't cancel life's problems. And so just wondering your thoughts on that idea of Abraham has been told to go, and then here we are in this moment where we come to a famine in the land and there's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's been given this wonderful, we just saw last week, this wonderful promise that you're going to flourish, and then a problem comes up. What are your kind of thoughts on that, and expound upon that a little bit?
I ended the sermon with an illustration of a painter who was tasked with painting peace, how he interpreted peace, and he painted a picture of a small little sparrow in a tree, under the protection of the branches, but in the middle of a storm, and the little sparrow is just singing away, and how that little sparrow had peace in the middle of that storm. And we can't avoid life's storms. We can't avoid those famines that come at us, because they do. And we have the promises of God, But what do we do when the storm hits, when the famine comes? And it's knowing that I'm going to be okay because I have the promises of the Lord.
Yeah.
And I can lean on those, and I say, God, in the middle of the storm, I'm under your branch, and I'm going to keep going with life. I'm not going to sit here and worry and stress out and let that guide me, but rather, the promises of the Lord. That's what's going to guide me and direct me. And it's true what you said. It's just like those promises are real, and we have to lean on them.
Right. We see over and over and over and again in the Old Testament. And Hunter, you said no man is the hero of these Old Testament stories. God is the hero. But we see over and over and over this lack of trust. And you might say, look at some of these Old Testament stories and go, well, how does this apply to my life? Well, where do you turn when things like famine come? And so famine, big piece of this text. Hunter actually texted Juan and I last week and was like, we could do a whole, you didn't say we should, you said we could do a whole series on famine in the Bible because it's a common theme. And like you mentioned, it's not something that we think of in our Western culture of very much because we have plenty of access to lots of things, but in terms of not experiencing famine. But why don't you take us down your little famine rabbit hole that you went down last week?
Yeah, it's like some people will lay in bed late at night and watch like a deep YouTube videos and end up in a YouTube hole that they're like, I don't even know how I got here. And I did that with famine research on just, in the Bible, most of the times that you see a famine, it's leading people into the promise that God has made to them or the declaration that God has made. And so, I had mentioned the story of the prodigal son. When we see the famine in the prodigal son, which a lot of Americans miss because we don't, for us, it's a sermon about money and wealth and squandering and being, good, real close with your dad. And it's like, no, it's a story about provision and people and family and the loving welcome of God. And the famine is the thing that pushes the son back home because it's the famine's the thing that gets the son to a place where he realizes I need to lean on the promises of the Father and the security and the hope of the Father. And so often when we see famine in Scripture, we see God pushing people into deeper faith and trust in Him. And man, if the Genesis story with Abraham was, go to the land that I'll show you, and then midway through chapter 12, it's, this is it. This is the promised land. This is Canaan. You've done a good job. And then, book of Genesis ends right there. Way lamer story and way less real and applicable. Mm-hmm. And because the reality is, and Juan and I both pushed into fear, is that famine brings fear because in a famine, you can't control the rain. You can't control the crop. And so it drives you to fear. And so many of these Old Testament stories and even the stories in Genesis, like we could preach about fear probably every week in this series because there's this element of how do we give up control of the things that we can't control and trust the Lord with them? And there's so much for Abram that he can't control. And I think that we in American Western world have more control over things than we have for a long time. We can generally control our housing and our food and all of that stuff. But if you stop and think, there are so many things in our lives that are inching towards spiraling out of control that we have to trust the Lord with. You can't control your kids and their faith, and you can't control the ways in which people will respond or hear words that you say, or how hard things will work out. And so, just a longer thing, but like famine, you get to this place where God is again and again in the Old Testament, and we'll see it a few more times in Genesis, or if you read past Genesis, you'll see famine and the prophets famine. God's using famines, and He uses famines in our lives.
And so, we use the word drought a lot. In agriculture and things like that. You've got, I remember several years ago, it was in the hundreds, all like it felt like for 2 months it was in the hundreds. It was a really hot year, and at the time we had a handful of cows, and I got to feed these cows, and a bale of hay went up a lot. And cows, it doesn't take very many cows to get through a whole round bale of hay. They're not the cleanest eaters; they just dig in there. And so, did you know this?
I did
Did you
not
know
know
this?
this, no.
So just several years ago, I mean, hay went way up, and over the last couple of years, we've had more rain, and so the price of hay has gone down. And so, probably that would be. I'm sitting over here just trying to think. We don't talk about famine, but we've got folks in rural East Texas that experience that, and working in the farmers market, doing the coffee business and stuff like we experience when, little other events like torrential rain or flooding, or just lack of rain causes the crops to not yield as much. And so these are people that rely on, and so in this culture, that's why famines are such an important thing, because everything revolves around what you can grow with the land. So
and famine's worst case scenario,
right,
for especially in ancient Near Eastern culture. Today it'd be wild. Like it would be all over the news if people didn't have food and you couldn't, all that stuff. And but famine's worst case scenario. And so for you to think about, like, what are the worst case scenarios in your life that like the Lord, because we're not talking about if we actually experience a famine. That'd be crazy. But there are famine adjacent things in our life that we experience. And so just to be clear about that. But
Juan, tell us a little bit about what maybe didn't make the cut for you, or maybe get into a little bit of kind of this angle that you took about what he left with. In terms of.
So when he went into Egypt, the Pharaoh gave him sheep, donkeys, camels, and slaves. And when the Pharaoh finally found out this deception, he literally said, "Take your wife and go, leave." And literally he's saying, "I don't want anything to do with you, with your wife, with your God. Just take everything." And we can look at that and say, well, why did God allow that, right? How's that fair? It almost seems that it worked so well that later on in Genesis, Abraham does it again, and with Abimelech, and he says, "This is my sister." Same scenario, same thing, and we're like, okay, it worked well the first time, let's do it again. So we're like, how is that fair? And then when you really look at what happened in Egypt, and you're thinking it was a win scenario for him. What I noticed was that one of the slaves that he received in Egypt was Hagar,
right?
And how Hagar then plays into later on with Sarah not being able to have or conceive kids. Well, Abraham takes Hagar and has a child with her, which is Ishmael, and how there's now a conflict between Hagar and Sarah, where almost it's like Hagar is wanting to kind of level up in status, and say, look what I've done. I've provided him a child and you haven't.
Right.
And Sarah cannot live with Hagar, and the conflict that happens with the nation of Ishmael and the nation of Abraham, which is still in conflict today. And you think back, is like, could all of that been avoided? Was it really truly a win for him with all of the stuff that he received when he got out of Egypt? So I thought that was super interesting. So
yeah. It's when Juan told me that this morning, I was like, "Dang, dude, you missed an opportunity to fill me in on something real good. Something
that's good.
that I could have.
We don't often think about where did Hagar come from. I think that's a great question of this text, and probably not a foregone conclusion that she could have come from this moment.
Certainly,
And it's I don't think the text lays that out anywhere. You guys could correct me if we find it, we'll let you know. But I've never asked that question.
It's just the general assumption, right? That
Mm-hmm.
this is where she comes from, and it's
it just refers to her as the Egyptian slave. So that.
Yeah, it gives you enough right there that is probably two last things that Hunter touched on, and I'd love for you to react and kind of think on these 2 points. The first one is this quote that God's grace there's more grace in God than there is sin in us.
Sure.
Really a just interesting and beautiful thing, right? Like I
Yeah.
heard some folks say, "Amen." Like, and that is true. And we see these moments of God's grace just being so great when these non-heroes, right? We call them the heroes of the faith, but they make colossal mistakes, and we should be encouraged by that, right? But what do you think about that little point there, Juan? That God's grace, God has more grace in him than we have sin in us.
Yeah, and you're right. We like to build up these people of the Bible, like the Moses and the Ruths and the, and the Abrahams but even David, David had the mistakes that he made, and the thing is that we can look back and we are encouraged to know that God's grace is there, and it's sufficient, and it encourages us to keep going, even though yes, we make mistakes, we are not enough, we can discourage ourselves, but God says, no, I'm here to build you up, and I'm here to use you. Yes, you've made a mistake. Let's keep going, and that's what He did with all of these people of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard more feedback in 24 hours on that section of my sermon than I have on maybe anything I've ever preached. Just because I guess it was timely, or parts of it were clear. And I told this illustration on like I had a day last week or 2 weeks ago, and I guess now, where I was driving home, and I just felt like I sucked at my job, and I sucked as a friend, I sucked as a husband, Just one of those days when you're like, dang, dude, I really just kind of stink. I'm not good at the things that I am trying to do. And I get home, and I walk in the kitchen, I turn the corner, and Noah greets me like he does every day, which is with this great scream and joy, and he's clapping his hands and grunting, and just like he's eating dinner, and he's just throwing food everywhere, and just so happy to see me. And this, Noah loves me as if I'm the only father in the world. And our Father loves us as if we're His only child, as if we're the apple of His eye, the most prized possession. And we think, well, I got a brother over here that's way more deserving, a brother over here that's way more deserving, and a sister over there that's way more deserving. But God has chosen to show us such a great love. And Paul in Ephesians 3, prays that the people would, they would feel the love that surpasses all understanding, the love of Christ, and that they would be full in that. And we so desperately try to be filled by other things, but it's the love of Christ, the grace of God,
Right.
That is so great. And I also am not in the business of giving people a pass to their sin, but I also want to give them all the passes towards the grace of Jesus. Yeah. And so, just living in that tension. And
it was funny, and I texted you on Saturday because I'm in the deep throes of my of a big paper for my doctorate right now, and it's due this Friday, so y'all should pray for me. I'm editing it, and I'm nervous because it's my first really big paper for my doctorate, and all of these themes just resurface. This paper I'm writing is about Isaiah 8 and 9, and there's some really weird stuff going on in Isaiah 8. The people have turned to conspiracy, and God, through the prophet, gives an oracle about not looking to conspiracy but looking to God and trusting in His word. And then Isaiah responds with this really strange text about not only conspiracy, but the people are consulting mediums and the dead, and that they're thrust into this land of deep darkness where they're angry and hungry, and they turn to their God and they curse their God. And so it's just this really dark time in Israel. And in this turn of chapter 9, we get this text that into this land of darkness, that God is shining His light. And that's where we get the beautiful Advent text of, on the land of deep darkness, a light is shown. And verse 6 is, for unto us a child is born.
right.
The light of Christ shines in the darkness. And that's what it got me down this rabbit hole of wondering through kind of that idea of that there's more hope in Him than there is sin in us. There's more mercy in Him than there is sin in us.
Yeah,
there's
so
more
good,
grace in Him than there is sin in us. And it's just beautiful to see it over and over again in the Old Testament, the fallen, just desperate brokenness of man. And God, has every reason to just stand in judgment with his face turned.
Right.
But he over and over and over again provides for his people, and we're going to continue to see that in the life of Abraham. One last quote to think on. And this one, I honestly, Hunter, when you said this quote, it stopped me for a minute, and I was like, okay, Hunter doesn't even know which one it is, but here it is. When we're born, we look like our parents.
Oh, yeah.
When we die, we look like our decisions.
Yeah.
I heard somebody else say that.
Yeah.
Did you hear that one, Juan?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
So,
Profound thought. Now, there's probably, I think in my mind, I was like, well, there are lots of things that can contribute to our weight, but when I was 18 years old, I didn't weigh this much, right?
Sure.
What I eat matters on what I look like, but that's a little thing. But you see, you can see in people the things that they go through and the impact it takes on our bodies, and some of those things are self-induced, and some of those things are probably induced by others. Is the caveat I might make, but there's truth in the statement.
I think that where somebody that would push back and say, well, somebody else's decisions can make you at the end of your life, and I get it, but as somebody who has had adults make terrible decisions on my behalf when I was little, I could say I feel confident saying I still had to respond.
Right.
And maybe my disposition was set up for me to respond one way or another, but at the end of the day, I still had to respond. And I get why some people respond the way that they do. But I just, and I would encourage people, and just to close in the conversation too, of like, I think that we have all tried to live our lives out of fear, and we see how that works for us. Why don't you just try to live your life out of faith and see how that works for you? Just test it out. But I did love that quote. We're born looking like our parents, will die looking like our decisions. Your decisions matter, and that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Juan, what do we have to look forward to next week? Where are we going?
We have 10 weeks with Abraham. So
10 weeks.
yeah.
So this week we have a combined service in the gym. No, we're going to be in the
for the
worship
11
center.
o'clock. Yeah.
11 o'clock.
Yeah.
With
So I'll be preaching at a TVCC service. We're going to have the basketball team, so that's
Yeah.
exciting. Go Cardinals! Apparently we're supposed to do something.
I'm not doing that.
You're not doing the
cards.
The cards, yeah. But we got Lot. We're looking at Lot and that whole situation with Abraham and how this story keeps going. It's just getting crazier. So yeah.
Yeah. Well,
rolling.
I'm enjoying so far, and I hope you are too. And feel free to, let us know if you have any questions about this, and we'd love to kind of bring them into these conversations as we continue on the Let's Go podcast. You guys got anything else before we sign off? Any burning last second things?
No, I have plenty of time to talk. I need to talk a little bit less.
Yeah.
That'll make the world go round. We let's say our motto as we go:
Yeah.
love God,
Live like Jesus.
Serve others.
Let's
go.
Vamos.
Okay.
Vamos.
See you guys.